Vietnam. In 20 years, it grew from a distant aggravation to a national nightmare. April 29, 1975, the final day of the Vietnam War. South Vietnam, our ally for decades, was disintegrating fast, its army in disarray, the Saigon government in chaos. Steamrolling toward the heart of South Vietnam, the communist offensive, in its path, a terrified exodus of South Vietnamese and almost 2,000 Americans trapped in Saigon. From Washington, the order came down, get them out now. In the final hours of the Vietnam War, America undertook a desperate and heroic mission under the most perilous conditions, a total U.S. evacuation, Operation Frequent Wind. This is the story of the fall of Saigon, of the final defeat of the capital city of South Vietnam, and of the life and death struggle to escape to America in the face of the enemy. Through it all, ABC News was there. Watch now the original ABC News broadcast of a great TV news story, the turbulent end of a tragic war, America's final hours in Vietnam. From ABC News, great TV news stories with Ted Koppel, Frank Reynolds, Harry Reisner, Howard K. Smith, Tom Jarrell, Ken Kashiwahara, and the worldwide resources of ABC News. January 1973. The United States and North Vietnam signed the Paris Peace Accords. America's direct military involvement in Vietnam comes to an end. A ceasefire is declared, and U.S. ground forces are withdrawn. American POWs return home. America breathes a sigh of relief and tries to put the war behind it. South Vietnam must now fight the North Vietnamese alone. But peace proves temporary. Within a year, a revitalized North Vietnam resumes attacks on the South. By the first months of 1975, what had now become Hanoi's juggernaut offensive moved swiftly ahead. South Vietnam, weakened by waning U.S. support, begins to falter. South Vietnamese President Nguyen Van Thieu and his government desperately trade land for time. As a result, the defense perimeter around the city of Saigon erodes. The day is March 13, 1975.
Almost exactly 10 years ago, the major U.S. involvement in Vietnam began. It began after the communists blew up an American officers' quarters in the Central Highlands capital of Pleiku. But the real reason was that U.S. intelligence said the North Vietnamese were about to cut South Vietnam in half, across the Central Highlands to the sea. Today, the Associated Press says the South Vietnamese have decided to give up the 3 Central Highlands provinces of Kon Tum, Pleiku, and DİCH. South Vietnamese officials are quoted as saying headquarters units and some Americans in the area have been flown out, and the ground forces in the area are going to try to fight their way east to the coast. It would be the biggest South Vietnamese retreat in the whole war, and it would abandon to the communists a long list of places where Americans died: Pleiku, Kon Tum Airport, Dak To. The South Vietnamese are quoted as saying they are hampered in supplying the area and that they will consolidate in more easily defended coastal enclaves. That was a strategy advanced in 1967 by General James Gavin and rejected by the American command and the Johnson administration. The story from South Vietnam grew increasingly grim today. Reports of new government withdrawals continue to flow into Saigon. The number of provinces abandoned to the communists or in the process of evacuation increased to 8. The latest additions are Bin Long, just 60 miles north of Saigon, and Tuat Can on the northern coast. The city of Hue, which is in that province, was reported today to be a ghost town. Meanwhile, there were reports that 5 more provinces are in danger of collapse, among them Tai Ninh province, which borders on Cambodia. Jim Giggins reports from the Tai Ninh-Saigon Road.
For the Saigon government, the news from nearly every corner of the country is bad. And the events here, not more than 25 miles from the capital, are a microcosm of what's happening throughout South Vietnam, which is to say, Saigon's enemies are pressuring Saigon's troops into pulling back on every front. Viet Cong soldiers cut this road from Saigon to Tay Ninh, and South Vietnamese helicopters did all they could to dislodge them. Despite South Vietnamese air power, the Viet Cong held on. Instead of giving up, they advanced, terrifying not only the civilians, but a good many government soldiers as well, who created a traffic jam of retreating army vehicles and troops. This road is the lifeline between Saigon and its forces fighting along the Cambodian border. Yet the Viet Cong are everywhere. Those government soldiers and police who stayed behind formed a nervous roadblock to keep any unsuspecting civilians from moving into the battle area. Few wanted to go in when they saw hundreds were coming out. The question being asked now is how long can President Thieu, militarily and politically, take these losses? The Central Highlands now belongs to Saigon's enemies. Hue and the Northern Territories are tottering. Tay Ninh is under siege. The area around Saigon is secure, but that's about all. This is Jim Giggins, ABC News, on the Saigon-Tay Ninh Road.
In some of the areas further north, the communists appear to be aiding the withdrawal. There was one report that a communist tank force turned on its lights so retreating government troops could find their way at night. But in other sections, the communists were reported harassing troops and refugee columns. The refugee exodus continued today from the 3 Central Highlands provinces abandoned earlier. Frank Mariano has a report.
This group is part of 15,000 persons brought to the coastal area of Tuy Hoa under the protection of South Vietnamese troops. The military commander said they had come under sporadic attack by North Vietnamese forces all along the way. Many left so quickly, much of what they owned had to be left behind. Many families were separated. Now some had to share a hastily selected refugee camp with strangers. Coastal enclaves like Tuy Hoa and Nha Trang will soon be filling up. A 60-mile-long refugee convoy from Pleiku and other parts of the highlands is halted 20 miles from here due to bridges being out all along the escape route. There are said to be anywhere from 50 to 150,000 persons lining the road. Before the exodus from the 3 provinces is over, 250,000 people will have left their homes which they will likely never see again. Frank Mariano, ABC News, Saigon.
In South Vietnam today, the communists are reported to be in firm control of at least 7 provinces and are fighting for at least 7 others. There was fighting today only 35 miles from Saigon, where officials have ordered the city's militia into a state of alarm and readiness. In the north, there are reports that the old capital of Hue is 80% evacuated. The fighting has been getting heavier there. An estimated 40 to 50,000 vehicles of all types are reported on the road leading south to Da Nang. We have a report on the refugees from ABC's Jim Giggins.
The largest mass exodus in the history of South Vietnam is clogging the roads in the northern provinces as well as the Central Highlands. For tens of thousands of civilians in Hue, the handwriting is on the wall. The government cause is lost, with little left to do but to try to reach Da Nang and relative safety. As a result of the lightning North Vietnamese Viet Cong victories these past few weeks, day-to-day life in Vietnam is turned into a question mark. Hospitals can hardly handle all the wounded soldiers and civilians, victims of the Blitz from the north. The Saigon government doesn't even control all the main roads in the country, which means that a simple trip from one town to another often turns into a nervous waiting game, with the Viet Cong cutting the highway, daring anyone to pass. Some of the evacuees are Americans. This group, associated with a United States engineering firm operating in Vietnam, had to hastily leave DİCH as it came under North Vietnamese siege.
It's a very sad sight in DİCH. The people are along the roads and along the streets with all their possessions, waiting for buses or trucks or anything to come that they can load their few things on so they can leave town.
People are all worried, and my dad wants us out of there in case the enemy attacks.
The loss or probable loss of so much, especially symbolic cities like DİCH, has all but demoralized Saigon's forces. In the old days, they would fight for every inch of highway. Now, instead of fighting back, there is often little left for government troops to do but accept, for the moment at least, the enemy's control of some of their most vital territory. This is Jim Giggins, ABC News, reporting.
The Viet Cong have said they will negotiate a settlement with South Vietnam only if President Thieu steps down. But Thieu seems determined to stay in power. He said so again in a television address to his nation. ABC's Ken Kashiwahara reports.
President Yu told his countrymen during the television address was that he will not resign, will not accept a coalition government with the communists, and will instead regroup the army and take back the provinces that have fallen. Yu praised the fighting spirit of those units in central Vietnam, and at the same time blamed field commanders and the lack of American military aid for recent setbacks. Politically, Yu named this man, House Speaker Nguyen Bach Can, to be the new prime minister, while at the same time accepting the resignation of the old prime minister and the entire cabinet. Indeed, there has been evidence in Saigon over the past few days that Yu wanted to fight and not quit. Government banners and flags have sprouted up, urging the people and the army to stand fast, promising that the communists will be defeated. And if they didn't read the message, they surely heard it. Loudspeakers in the city center have been blaring words of encouragement to all who will pay attention, and the volume is such that it is difficult not to.
What it all means is that President Yu has refused to accept the advice of some of his closest supporters who have urged him to step down, and in doing so has dashed any immediate hopes for negotiations with the communists and may have caused a serious split within his own camp that may eventually lead to his downfall anyway. Ken Kashiwahara, ABC News, Saigon.
It all began on March 10th, less than a month ago, with a North Vietnamese attack in the Central Highlands. 3 days later, President Yu ordered withdrawal from the highlands, and refugees began flowing east toward the sea. The following week, 6 provinces fell to the North Vietnamese. One was in the north. The next week, only last week, 3 more northern provinces fell, and with them the ancient and beautiful, once beautiful city of Hue. In the south, another province fell. By the end of last week, the government withdrawal was a rout. Early this week, Da Nang, second largest city in South Vietnam, fell to the communists. By midweek, 3 more provinces were captured, and Quy Nhon, third largest city, was taken. This weekend, Saigon itself is imperiled. This last map shows the area held by the North Vietnamese up to today, but what it cannot show is the buildup of communist forces within reach of Saigon, estimated now at more than 250,000 and growing by some 1,000 troops every day. Just now it seems there are even more North Vietnamese in the Saigon area than there are South Vietnamese troops.
The Pentagon announced today that all 9 carriers of the 7th Fleet have left port and are sailing in the South China Sea, presumably standing by in case they're needed to aid in the evacuation of U.S. citizens. Officials say the number of Americans in Saigon has dropped from 6,000 to about 3,000 in the last 2 weeks. South Vietnamese forces lost Phan Thiet today, the 19th provincial capital that has fallen to the communists. The government now controls only the southern third of the country. And today the Viet Cong said it's preparing for an all-out attack on Saigon. Reports say 100,000 enemy troops have massed near the capital, outnumbering its defenders 2 to 1. The communists are testing those defenses with assaults on cities around Saigon. One of their targets has been Xuan Loc. ABC's Jerry King reports on the fighting there.
The fight for Xuan Loc has gone on for 1.5 weeks. There's not much left for the communists to take, not much for the South Vietnamese to defend. The city is 40 miles from Saigon. It is surrounded by the North Vietnamese and must be resupplied by helicopter. And there are still refugees who were caught in the city when the communists closed off the main road to safety. There are also North Vietnamese, dead commandos left behind after their attempt to capture the city failed. The Saigon government is still holding on to the city, but the cost has been high, and in the end, it may well prove to be superfluous. Further back Highway 1, the road from Saigon, government troops have been unable to dislodge the North Vietnamese and open the way to Xuan Loc. In fact, they themselves are slowly being pushed back toward the capital. Just down this road, the South Vietnamese forces regrouped once again and were trying to fight off the advancing North Vietnamese. There was a lot of small arms fire and close-in combat with communist troops only a few hundred yards away. It got so hot and heavy that the command armored personnel carrier withdrew from the front lines and set up a little further back. From there, it directed many rounds of incoming government artillery. The South Vietnamese army is contesting every inch of terrain along these fields, but inch by inch it is being pushed back Whatever happens here, most military analysts are agreed. The Saigon command is only buying time. Jerry King, ABC News, in the fields near Highway 1, South Vietnam.
I'm Dick Carlson in Los Angeles. The South Vietnamese military command has ordered its troops to abandon the provincial capital of Xuan Loc. The battle for the city, only 38 miles from Saigon, was considered a key to the capital's defense. Its fall left gaping holes in the northeastern flank of Saigon's defenses. Xuan Loc is the 21st provincial capital to fall in the current communist offensive. The threat of an all-out attack has brought the war home to the people of Saigon. ABC's Jim Giggins reports.
This has always been a deceiving city. Even in the worst of times, life and death appear to continue with their normal rhythm. But underneath, there's a growing panic that could shatter the city's facade at any moment.
There's an apathy showing up. There's a indifference in some people, and in a lot of other people, there's a sense of panic developing. Every day now, I meet friends who start talking about themselves or members of their family carrying poison. And this is intended for, if the other side takes over, that they'll use it to commit suicide.
The Vietnamese government has always refused to issue its citizens passports unless they are very rich or influential. Consequently, they cannot leave the country. And this is one of the reasons there is so much desperation. Hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese frantically want out, and there's apparently no way. Is it difficult to get a passport for your wife's Vietnamese relatives?
It's impossible today. You can take a chance on buying them. They sell anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000. And there's no guarantee that once you have that you're still going to be able to get on a plane.
The government knows a large segment of the population is desperate. The police have responded by subtly increasing the patrol along the rivers and sea to keep people from trying to escape the country. The airport, always off limits, is more heavily guarded than usual, and the word has gone out that any unauthorized plane taking off might possibly be shot down. What a good many Vietnamese are hoping for is that the United States will intercede and put pressure on President Thieu into letting those Vietnamese out now who feel they would simply not be welcome were the other side to march into Saigon. America so far has put very little pressure, and the resulting tension mounts higher every day. This is Jim Giggins, ABC News, Saigon.
President Thieu spoke to his nation today, announcing in a bitter, tearful, rambling 90-minute address that he is quitting. South Vietnam cannot win militarily, he said, and he blamed the United States. Thieu read a letter, he said, had been written by President Nixon in 1973, promising all necessary aid to South Vietnam if it would sign the Paris Peace Accords. But the Paris Agreement, Thieu said, led the South Vietnamese people to death. The Americans promised us, Thieu said, and we trusted them. And of Secretary of State Kissinger, he said, I never thought a man like Mr. Kissinger would deliver our people to such a disastrous fate. Thieu said his resignation would, quote, let the United States give Vietnam aid and open the way for negotiations. Of his own future, Thieu said nothing. While the situation in Vietnam has worsened, U.S. naval forces have been moving into the South China Sea to help with a last-minute evacuation attempt if one should become necessary. ABC's Jerry King reports.
The American fleet in Southeast Asia is 40 miles off the coast. There was the attack carrier Midway, one of the 5 aircraft carriers assigned to the area. Its location was only 100 miles from Saigon. Further along, there was the Hancock, a helicopter carrier. Then we flew past the Okinawa. Like the Hancock, one of the carriers which only last week was used in the evacuation of Phnom Penh. ABC News counted between 15 and 20 American warships steaming off the coast. They seem to be patrolling back and forth, presumably awaiting word from the Pentagon if they are needed for the evacuation of the more than 3,000 Americans still in Vietnam. An evacuation is tangible evidence for the South Vietnamese that the collapse of their country is considered near. Jerry King, ABC News, over the South China Sea off South Vietnam.
Here in Washington, President Ford told congressional leaders this morning that by nightfall, only about 1,500 Americans, what Mr. Ford called the barest minimum number, will be left in South Vietnam. The question remains, what happens to those 1,500 and perhaps to tens of thousands of Vietnamese who may want to leave Saigon? ABC diplomatic correspondent Ted Koppel reports.
Publicly, officially, the administration is taking the position that many, possibly even most of those 1,500 Americans are going to remain behind in Vietnam to help the new Saigon government obtain a peaceful settlement. privately, the problem is spelled out much more bluntly. Evacuation plans for the last remaining Americans have to be formulated without sparking panic in Saigon. But contingency plans have already been made, and the number of Americans remaining now has almost reached a point at which everyone could be lifted out in the course of one swift operation that would take less than a day. The prospects for evacuating large numbers of Vietnamese, however, appear to be fading. Republican Senator John Tower of Texas addressed himself to that question, having been briefed this morning at a GOP leadership meeting at the White House by top administration officials.
The administration probably is looking realistically at the matter now, and is thinking only in terms of what is possible.
This is just a few thousand, is it not?
In my view, it'd be just a few thousand. I wouldn't be able to specify numbers, but I would reckon it in the thousands rather than in the tens of thousands.
The key question now is whether a major battle for the city of Saigon can be avoided. If it can, and Secretary Kissinger believes the chances are only slightly better than even, then the orderly evacuation of tens of thousands of Vietnamese could still be worked out. But barring a negotiated ceasefire with the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong, the most the administration expects to accomplish now is the safe withdrawal of all Americans, together with a few hundred Vietnamese who could be airlifted out at the same time. This is Ted Koppel, ABC News at the State Department.
The fighting in South Vietnam was down to near zero today, while the flow of refugees out of the country sharply escalated. Efforts were underway in Saigon to form a new government that could negotiate with the communists, with the name of General Duong Van Minh, Big Min, prominently mentioned. With the communists poised for a final move on Saigon just about at will, the lull has increased speculation that something has been or is being worked out behind the scenes. But others believe the lull, which is now in its fourth day, is beginning to get ominous. ABC White House correspondent Tom Jarrell reports.
The lull has gone about as long as we could imagine. I have a gut feeling something is about to change. That view was expressed today by a U.S. Vietnam expert who believes it's possible that a surrender or be attacked ultimatum could be issued by the North Vietnamese against the Saigon government within 24 hours. Such a rumor is already circulating in Hong Kong, but U.S. officials say they can find no solid basis for it. The 4-day pause after the North Vietnamese have encircled Saigon has the earmarks of a period of frantic behind-the-scenes diplomatic negotiations aimed at avoiding a final battle for the capital. The Saigon government's moves to put General Big Min back in power is described by one U.S. official as the maximum Saigon can go to prove to the other side that you are ready to quit. The North Vietnamese have not tried to attack the U.S. evacuation airlift, and in an apparent signal back, President Ford has said the United States' role is over in Vietnam. When questioned today about U.S. North Vietnamese diplomatic contacts, the president's spokesman would only say the subject is too delicate, too sensitive to discuss. Tom Jarrell, ABC News, Washington.
These Americans and their Vietnamese dependents are terrified of what the communists will do to them and their children if they take Saigon, because they've all worked for the Americans at one time or another, or so they claim. Now they're using their American connection, however tenuous, to try to qualify for the U.S. airlift. Some of them make it. Most of them don't. The lucky ones are usually the children. Nick Lally is a bachelor, an American aircraft technician who's lived in Saigon for the past 9 years. A few days ago, the widowed mother of Nguyen Thi Yut, a little girl who used to deliver his newspapers, came and begged him to adopt her child and get her out of Vietnam. Suddenly, at the age of 55, with a heart condition and no fixed address, he's a father. There are hundreds of Vietnamese out at Saigon's Tan Son Nhut airport who camp here in the hope that some American somehow might be able to get them out. If not them, their children. With the communist forces a few miles away, they believe that they are all living on borrowed time.
Well, be happy, smile. Let me see you smile. Big one. Give me a big one. Give me a kiss.
Hillary Brown, ABC News, Saigon.
Viet Cong forces shelled the center of Saigon in the pre-dawn hours of Sunday. It was the first time in over 2 years that's happened, and apparently meant as a reminder that the communist forces can strike the city at will. At least 6 people were killed in the attack. The Saigon government is trying to prevent an all-out assault on the capital this weekend if peace efforts fail. The prospect for Saigon is very grim indeed, as ABC's Hillary Brown reports.
This is the route that the North Vietnamese army would take for an assault on Saigon from the north. Now they seem to be moving closer to the capital, poised for the strike. The South Vietnamese army are so outnumbered and outflanked now that even if they fought hard, they'd be overrun in a couple of days. Clear that the communist forces are keeping up a steady pressure on the receding government defense line in the north, where they have at least 2 divisions against 1, and where every day South Vietnamese armor and men are withdrawn for regrouping. At the 25th Division headquarters at QUİC, north of Saigon, new recruits go through a crash training program. The course is usually 3 months, but they've cut it to 8 weeks now. Soon they'll be rushed to the northern front, if it's still there. Hillary Brown, ABC News, 30 miles north of Saigon.